Delighted thieves and disappointing warriors. The runner Bonhams were in fact ordinary greedy young men who had become dangerous by accident. To tell the truth of them, they were not the kind of robbers who would have beaten the head of an unwanted intruder. But they did possess the means of creating just as much confusion in his brain, a confusion that might have proved permanent in a head already so unsettled with hunger and weariness. Just a few years earlier, the Bonham brothers had been pleasant, if somewhat useless, children. They were only good at running. They were not swift, but they had endurance. They could run all day without stopping. Their mother was ferociously fond of them. She was as protective as a mother sow. She was an enormous person who always wore a mourning cloak for their father. She swore it was insects that had killed him, even though she had given his head a few knocks with a pan the day he died. She said it was the insects that ate his insides out. She also was concerned that the insects had been passed on to the sons. Since they'd all be dying young, she thought training them to work would be cruel. They grew up as delighted with themselves as she was. They thought they were great. 2 of them were small, 2 of them big, and 1 was of middling size. The brains, whatever little they had between them, were divided in compensation for the size. The little lads were smart enough, especially when it came to avoiding harm to themselves. The middle lad also had some bit of a brain when it came to taking care of his own interests. The big lads never showed much sign of having anything at all going on underneath the wads of sandy hair. Naturally, their mother was worried about how her boys would eat without working. So from early on, she had taught them the comfort of other people's possessions. She gave them good advice. Stealing was best done in many small amounts, so as not to make any one person too angry. And it was to be done after some observation, at a time when you knew there was nobody at home. Neighbours did notice certain things. The little gold ornaments in the cabin and the fine horse and chariot outside it. The ever-increasing size of the mother. They thought it strange that boys who did no fishing, farming, tool-making, soldiering or entertaining were able to provide so well for their big woman. But they assumed it was to do with some kind of bargain the sturdy, lumbering lady had made with disreputable forces. And they took comfort in the knowledge that dealing with such sources rarely ends well. In the beginning, then, the Bonhams' method was simple. The smalls would hide in a tree, watching for a dwelling to be empty. They would then whistle for the others to go in. The bigs would lift flagstones and empty grain barrels, while the middle looked for some hidden valuables to put in his bag. It could be gold, silver, cloth or salt. Once they got anything, they did not hang around. They did not wish to meet the people whose possessions they were taking. They understood that this could lead to hard feelings. They usually didn't get very much, as they would take fright and run at the smallest sound. They would trot like foxes to the faraway Lisheen bogs. There they would trade their little haul with a rakish, red-haired dealer, a man called Tobin, who lived alone in the middle of those bogs. Despite the bargaining tricks their mother tried to teach them, Tobin always managed to get the best of every deal with them, robbing them as squarely as they had robbed their victims. Then one day, the thing happened that had transformed the Bonhams from being no more than a minor nuisance to being a major menace. A change that would ultimately lead Matha to their hideout. As usual, on that day the bigger ones went in to rob a little cabin, having been informed by the little ones that there was nobody home. The homeowner's sow was outside rooting under an apple tree as the bigger runners entered. She was very disturbed indeed by what she saw. She knew things weren't right, and she started doing a lot of snorting and giving out. As it happened, the man of the house wasn't far away. He had called over to a neighbour for a mug of mead and was not very entertained by the conversation. So when he heard the carry-on of the pig, who was a particular lady he had great respect for, it gave him an excuse to take his leave and wander home to see what troubled his only female companion. He made the short journey quicker than the smalls could whistle their warnings. On hearing the frantic whistles, the bigger bonhams of course wanted to do their usual trick. But standing between them and freedom, right in the middle of the doorway, they saw the short, burly man with neatly trimmed hair and an enormous moustache that was nearly as big as himself. In his hand he had a nice, slender blackthorn stick with a fine knob in the end of it. They didn't like the look of it. "Who the blazes is in my house?" The man started shouting without any restraint. "I'll clobber ye." The middle one told the big ones to shove the roaring obstacle out of the way so they could all get out. The big ones made a lunge at the man in the doorway. "And where do you think you're going, lads?" said the man, as life sprung into his stick. It made a terrible smack as it hit one of the big bonhams direct on the eye, and on the return stroke ploughed into the soft shoulder muscle of the other, deadening his arm for him. The bonhams fell back in terrible fright. It turned out the man had been a stick-fighting champion in his youth. He went by the name of Callig. Callig was in a rage, and now started coming forward into the lads, trapping them against the back wall, and landing cruel blows all over them. His fighting days had taught him to be hard, accurate, and mean with his stick. It was able to find the softest parts of the bonnet bodies, and he gave them all kinds of beneficial advice as he did so. It was not clear to the boys that the little madman had any plans of easing off, not while there was any breath or blood left in their bodies. "Injured to death you'll soon be, he kept saying. "That'll teach you discipline, me bucks." They were squealing and squeaking. Anyone passing might have thought a fox was in with the hens. In the end, the two small bonhams got a bit of courage up and crawled from the bushes outside. They went on their hands and knees behind Callig. The middling and big bonhams understood that this was going to be their only chance to get out of the house before this madman had knocked their few wits out of them. They rushed at him at once. That surprised him, and he stepped back, falling over the little toadstools behind him. He wasn't able to break the fall, and on his way to the ground he gave his head a good loud knock on the round stone next the door. With the stick quietened, the bonhams ran as fast as their limping, groaning bodies could carry them, leaving all of Callig's possessions behind, and their own bags along with them. They reached their hideaway cave. They lay on the hay. They were very sorry for themselves. They spent 3 days sipping water, nursing their bruises, and wondering would they ever be able to walk properly again before they even started talking about what had happened. "That was terrible. I never want it to happen again. I'm very ruffled," said one of the big bonhams. "I'm done with the trade now," said the other big bonham. The little ones were not happy with this line of talk and suggested they get advice from Tobin, whom they knew would not like it either. "What ails you?" Tobin asked as they limped towards him, a tincture of curiosity in his bog-flattened voice. He was tickled to see the neat bonnet boys with torn clothes, blackened eyes, and limping. Their tears flowed freely as they explained the situation to him. When he was done laughing, they asked him for advice on how to avoid conflicts of this kind in the future. "Let me understand you fully now," he says. "You're out there robbing people's most valued things, but you want them not to be angry with you, just to avoid any violence and harm to us. Maybe you should change over to being priests. They're the only other ones I know who get well fed without working or being entertaining." Tóibín the outcast was not a fan of the religious. His local druid had been to him many times, imploring him to give up his dealings with hooligans, to come back to his family, and most of all to come back to the respect of Dagda, Morgan, Bridget, and all those gods that most people want kept in good humour. Tóibín would chase the druid away, saying, "An eternity of misery in the other world is a low enough price to pay for not having to spend another day in the miserable company of my wife's crab-eaten family. I plan for tomorrow and let the next day take care of itself." "Maybe we could do that," said one of the bigs. "Become priests." "The only problem there," said Tóibín, "is that a druid must be able to feign wisdom and concern for others." "But it would be dishonest to pretend to be concerned about people besides ourselves," said the other big. "How about if we learn instruments then and become travelling musicians? They go to endless festivities, have drink poured into them, and have no responsibilities other than to stir up a good bit of crack." "Indeed," said Tóibín, "that might work. Except that musicians usually don't sound like injured crows." "You see," said the middle, "even when we want to be right, everyone just throws obstacles in our way." "You could go to work the fields," said Tóibín. "Don't be stupid," said one of the smalls. "So all that is left to you is to remain half-baked thieves," laughed Tóibín, "and hope that Micheál or his boys doesn't catch up with you. He doesn't share your distaste for violence from what I've heard. Now, what have you got from me today?" "We have brought nothing, because we haven't robbed a single place since that fella pulled so hard on us with the tree stump 2 weeks ago." Tóibín's face darkened. He had assumed the talk of quitting was just the usual idle noise. It angered him to think of having wasted conversations on visitors who had come to him with empty hands. After some minutes spent arguing with himself, he said, "All right then, listen here, you useless curs. I can give you something that will make your victims happier." He produced a clay jar from a cavity hidden behind a stone slab in the mud wall of his hut. "This is full of ash. I myself took it from a druid up north. One pinch of it, blown in the air, and whoever whiffs it will be as happy as pigs in muck. I'll give it to you on condition that you bring me twice as much stuff every day for the next 5 years." "But do you not want to keep a bit of it for yourself?" said one of the big ones. "To maybe cheer yourself up a bit?" "What would I be wanting with it? I see life plainly as it is. I don't need my judgment clouded by good feelings. Now take it and go, because I'm already thinking it's a terrible mistake to give it to such fools as you." The runner bonhams took the jar. They were excited, and had hardly gone 20 steps from Tóibín's bog hut when the 2 little ones lined up the other 3. As Tóibín watched from his doorway with a scowl of disbelief, they took a pinch of stuff from the jar and blew it up towards the faces of the stupider 3 to see what effects it would have. Right enough, a sweet happiness swept over them immediately. They were happy to the point of even greater stupidity, falling around the place, rolling in the freezing black bog water and tickling each other with rushes. It took a couple of hours for the effects to wear off. Their once dainty garments were now even more torn from frolicking through the bushes than they were covered from head to toe in mud stains. They went back to Tóibín with the jar. One of the small said, "This is no good. We wouldn't be able to rob anyone in that state." Tóibín came to them with his wooden boots flying. "It's not meant for you, you donkey shite. It's for the thrifty hoarders whose good things you're to bring to me." The boys didn't have long to wait for a chance to try it out. The owners of a group of huts on the river shore had gone to a meeting called by their chief. When the meeting ended, All 5 runners were inside one cabin choosing stuff to rob. No more hurry. No more bother about keeping a lookout. When the woman of the place shuffled in and saw them, the middle runner was ready with a pinch of the ash of delight and blew it at the woman through a straw so that it wouldn't spread around and get into them all. It worked instantly. The woman stood there smiling as they lifted everything of value. She just laughed as if they were her best friends. She even helped them carry out an oak settle bed that her father had engraved with designs of curly plants and fierce wild animals. Robbing had suddenly become too easy. And with easy takings, the runner Bonhams turned out to be greedy. They started robbing night and day. They ignored their mother's instructions. Instead of taking a few things that people could survive without, they now left nothing behind. Even Toby's son became nervous. They were taking far more than even he had expected. It's not wise. There will be trouble, he told them. If you want to keep getting eggs, you mustn't eat the hen. Yet he took what they brought him. Sure enough, the chiefs to the north of Slievenamon were soon meeting. They had a lot of very angry people who had lost their winter stores of grain and salted meats, as well as all their valuables. When the runners got wind of the anger, they simply decided to go to the south of the mountain. It was a bit farther to run, but at least nobody there would be expecting anything. As it happened, their first raid on the south side was on the homestead of the well-known woodcutter family, the Shays. They took the finest haul they had ever landed. So much that they had to steal a horse and mule to help with the load. They got the 3 befuddled Shay boys to help them calm the animals down while they filled baskets with the loveliest woolen clothing, patchwork quilts and embroideries made by 3 industrious generations of Shay women over countless winter evenings. They landed tools and brass utensils and other contraptions made by 3 generations of Shay men. They took blackened pots and golden gifts. They took the carefully minded dress of a little daughter who had died at the age of 3. They took a lot of clay plates and flasks. They even took a little brown bowl that they couldn't see a use for but assumed was valuable because of its perch on a high shelf. Had they the smallest idea of how much trouble that little bowl could bring, they might have left it behind. Had they known that the sound of a breaking branch as they entered their hideout a few days later was made by a boy who wanted nothing more than that bowl, they would happily have parted with it. Had Matha known how much trouble it could bring, maybe he too would have left it behind. Instead, he walked away from the Banff hideout with groundless confidence. He was somehow fixed on the idea of what he must do next. He went along the path till he found a track that looked like it was going northeast. He had heard of Tara being in that direction. The people of the farm places he called into for rest and food either did not know or would not say whether he was on the right road. They didn't talk to strangers about such things. He proceeded in this uncertain way on his journey to seek out the help of a man he had only ever heard tales about and who, in truth, he was not even sure existed. So fixed was Matha that he didn't know or care anything about the Bonhams. So fixed was he that he did not even care much about who else they might have robbed. The bowl had taken root in his mind now, as though it was the most important thing in the world. He was going to get it from those men by whatever means. As he walked, he became so determined that he even decided he would lie if he had to, or exaggerate at least. He would build up the thieves into marauding murderers, ruthless bandits, people who were ridiculing the king, whatever he had to say to ensure that he returned with help. It was a cold winter's day with the dewy dusk settling in quickly when Matha caught sight of large enclosures on the hills up ahead. It had to be Tara. He stopped along the track to ask a man how he might get into the great place on the hill, so as to meet the High King Cormac MacArt, or the famous Fionn Micheál. The man was bending over what looked like a piece of dried calf skin spread over a stone on the road. There were brown squiggles on the stretched pelt. He was smiling like a roasted pig. Matha suspected the unfortunate man was not entirely correct in his head. The man examined Matha with a dark eye and rolled up the tattered skin like it was a thing of great value, and tucked it with some ceremony into his tunic. Then he took a bite from a turnip that he had left by the side of the path. "Did you know that with this scrap of pelt I have no need of memory? All the laws and history of the world can be stored on this cow's backside," he asked. "MacArt talking. Who is looking?" Matha was not inclined to believe that this man was the High King of all Ireland. He had been brought up with grand notions of High Kings, great castles, fine robes, and much fuss. But he was not going to easily call any man a liar. Though this clearly was not King Cormac MacArt, it was certainly a man who genuinely believed himself to be, and therefore Matha responded respectfully. "Great King, could you possibly tell me where I might meet Fionn?" "What business do you have with that, lad?" said the man in a friendly tone, offering the turnip to Matha. "Here, taste these. These are surely the finest, sweetest little roots I've ever bred." "I have information on a band of robbers, that is." Well, what?" said the man impatiently. Matha inwardly swore at himself. All the exaggerations he had prepared, stories about old people beaten to death and terrified children, the words would not come out of his mouth. He was not able to lie, not even to this skitty old fella who was not listening. "They're causing great trouble down south," he said feebly. "Oh well, talk to Micheál. "Where is he?" "Over beyond in the other field there, trying to find one of his own turnips that he thinks will better mine." Matha looked over. Whatever doubts he had that the odd person next to him was king of his country, he could have none about who the person was that stood in the distance. Micheál was as large and fine a figure as Matha had heard of in the wildest stories. Indeed, back then, Fionn Micheál stood like a great oak tree. Matha thanked the king and made his way over to the warrior. Up close, Matha's disappointment set in. The famous doer of extraordinary deeds was grumpily stamping through a patch of turnips. His sword hung loosely off his belt in a dust-covered scabbard, no more impressive than a crooked stick in the hand of a shepherd or a mallet in the sack of a carpenter. "A good farmer, that's one thing I'll never be," was Micheál's greeting to Matha. "You look like a lad who spent some time scratching in the ground. What advice do you bring me?" "I am greatly honoured to be in your presence, and bring you every good wish," said Matha, not insulted. "The reason your plants are small is that the ground was not broken finely enough when the seeds were planted. Is that your opinion?" "It is," said Matha. "Did nobody ever teach you," said Micheál crankily, "that you shouldn't always give your opinion when you're asked for it?" "No," said Matha. Micheál looked at him with some surprise. He apparently was not used to being talked to bluntly by young people. Matha didn't mean to sound disrespectful. He just didn't know any other way to speak. Micheál came closer and lifted Matha from the ground as he inspected him. Suddenly, Matha was very afraid. Micheál stared at him. Then he put him down and said, "I can see that you are not somebody who came here to show how little you know about turnips. Tell me what request you come with, sonny, and let it be something that amuses me." "Thank you," said Matha. There are some people in and around Slievenamon having trouble with robberies." "Aye, I heard something of that. People think it's a dark force. People always think that. You don't believe it. It is so on this occasion. No. And I know the hideout of the lads that are doing it. Micheál looked more interested. Do you now? Matha continued. But I didn't follow them further because I suspect that they're using some kind of powder on the people they're robbing, because I overheard them talking about the ash sorting someone out. Micheál brightened up, and Matha became hopeful, but at the same time even more disappointed. The heroes he had grown up learning about would not be interested in some small-time robberies. Surely they had more glorious pursuits, wars to fight, foreign princes to slay. I'm tired of people coming here for us to solve local disputes, said Micheál, with a yawn, when they have no place for us to start. Well, I do have a place for you to start, Matha nodded. Come over here and listen to this, he shouted over towards the ditch. Another large man emerged from where he had apparently been lying looking at the sky. His huge black mane was covered in burdocks. Matha had heard stories about this man too, but not such glorious stories. Conan Micheál was the friend of Micheál, who was given to bursts of anger and practical jokes. Matha was very relieved to get a smile of greeting from him. Matha had hoped he might be taken into the royal residence on the near hillside. He tried to imagine unheard-of foods and a bed so comfortable that he could rest for days, but that was not going to happen. As he would learn, these two did not need much of an excuse to set out on a ramble across the country. Tara retained no attraction for them. Micheál and Conan showed little consideration for Matha, wanting only to make the road short. They walked much faster than he was used to doing. As he tried to keep up, he was surprised at their talk. Not about important royal matters nor interesting debates on matters of law. Instead, they were arguing about why rabbits eat their young and telling jokes about Gaul MacMorna, another warrior greatly revered by ordinary people. Matha was not very impressed at all. Also, his legs were finished by the time they looked at him and realised they needed to stop somewhere for a rest. That was provided in the cabin of a friend of theirs, who lived halfway along the route. After dishing out several jugs of his very flavoursome hare stew, the householder, an old man, shuffled off to a room behind the hearth, saying he didn't want to listen in on the important affairs of important men. Conan was for launching straight into the hideout first thing in the morning. Being thieves, they were unlikely to be more than half awake before noon, but Micheál decided that would be unwise until they found out more about this powder and what protection it might give them. "Why don't ye ask my brother, Killian Tobin?" came a voice from behind the fire. It was the old man in the other room, who of course wasn't sleeping at all, but listening to every word. There isn't a robber in this half of the country who hasn't some dealings with that miserable bogeyman. He may well know what powers these people have. At night, they continued their journey. Matha was desperately disappointed not to get asleep next to the fire, but he didn't say so, and he noticed they weren't asking him his opinion. They followed the old man's directions to get themselves to the hovel that Tobin called home. They had to wade through the treacherous, marshy Lishian swamps to get there. Because it was a relatively slow journey, word got round that they were in the area. The runner's mother heard the neighbour saying, "Of course the reason Micheál is in these parts is that he's a great friend of a cousin of mine who was in training for the Fianna once." She went to her sons and said, "Loves of my heart, does any of you know why Micheál and his two companions might be walking around this chieftaincy tonight? Walking around with swords and spears and no hounds. They're surely not here for hunting." "Do you think they found out about us?" a big runner said to the others in a panic. "Should we hand ourselves over?" Is that the end of us now? What'll happen to Mammy then? Settle, ordered the middle one. Sure, nobody can remember seeing us, and none of us is going to tell on the others. So we are just ordinary fellas, like the rest around these parts. Maybe we should lie low for a while all the same, said the more cautious of the big ones. What about Tobin? One of the smart smalls said. They'll get to Tobin because they know he's a trader. Tobin will have nothing to say to anyone. There's a great bond of trust between us and him going back a long time, said one of the bigs. There were many places the runner Bonhams had gone wrong, but this was their last big mistake. To think that you could count on the honour of a man who had once swapped his own son for 2 slabs of butter. Granted, good butter was scarce that year, and the son wasn't a whole lot of good. But the fact remained that there was no trade Tobin would not consider. Micheál, of course, knew that with a man like Tobin it would always come down to a calculation. If there was more benefit for himself in staying quiet, he would stay quiet. If there was more benefit for himself in talking, he would talk. And talk he did. After Micheál pointed out that there would be no benefit at all to himself in staying quiet, he was quite clear that he wasn't attracted to the idea of spending the rest of his life back in his dreaded wife's compound, tied to a peg in the ground like a goat. At the very mention of his wife's name, he was ready to deal. He immediately told Micheál that the 5 lads Matha had spotted were the Bonham boys. Useless lads, have me tormented, he said. Always bringing stuff and relying on my soft-heartedness to trade them things for it. Only afterwards do I sometimes wonder whether they might have taken the stuff from people who still needed it. You poor unfortunate, you have a hard life, said Conan. Indeed, that's what I think myself, said Tobin. As it happens, I've been advising them for a while to take it easy and not to rile people up. If they hadn't been greedy, we could have all got on with our business and lived happily with our neighbours like we always did in the olden times. The only neighbours you have here are frogs and water hens. Exactly, said Tobin. Do you need directions to their cave? We know where it is, said Micheál, glancing at Matha. Tobin looked surprised. What do you want then? Tell us about the powder, said Micheál. Powder? Asked Tobin, turning a greenish colour. Indeed, the powder. What effect might that have on us? Conan lifted Tobin by his long foxy hair and shook him a little. Tobin's memory improved. He told him everything he knew about the powers of the ash. Though as hard as he tried, he could not recall where they had got the merry stuff from. Matha then led Micheál to the copse of hazel, not very far in. As the trees descended to cover a bank of chalky rock, they found a cave. They went into the cave and lay down to wait, among glittering items bulging from mouldy sacks and precious salted meats that had been allowed to go rotten. They were not there long when they heard the boys approaching. They came dragging bags and a large iron pot with the winter provisions of another unfortunate family. As the big Bonhams put down the bags and continued complaining about why the smalls never had to carry anything, Micheál said, Well, the silhouettes of the robbers froze in fear and shock, though their eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the dark in the cave and they couldn't make out who was there. Then one of the smalls said softly, Tobin, is that you? What are you doing here? This is our stuff. You've no business here. Tobin couldn't get here, said Conan, but he sends his love. Who the devil are you? Demanded a big Bonham. Tobin would never have told any soul how to get here. Ah, the great Fionn, said the little one, guessing who the visitors were. He bowed gracefully to Conan. What an honour to meet you. If I may speak on behalf of the simple people of our province, we have always been great supporters. In fact, it's an amazing coincidence that you stumbled on our little store here, as we have been building it up as a nice surprise tribute for the High King Cormac and the Fianna. You have, said Micheál, stepping forward from the other side of the cave. Yes, said the little Bonniff, unfazed. To thank them for keeping all the good people of this area safe. We have worked hard and put this humble collection of food and many other good things aside for you. Well, aren't you the fine, considerate young men? Yes, indeed. In fact, my young brother Shawnee here used to draw pictures of what he thought Fionn would look like when he was a child. He's a great artist, actually, though I'm very good at it myself. And Severn, one of the bigger lads here, was often told he should go for the Fianna, as he is a top-class athlete and very strong. And clever. Though it's been said that I'm quite strong and clever myself, if I may say so. We are a cut above as a family, it has to be said. Shut your gob, said another man, now standing behind them in the mouth of the cave. This man they recognised without any difficulty. It was Callig, a very rough bandage around his head. Micheál had brought him along as a representative of all the people who had been robbed. Excuse me, said the middling one. I was just about to explain to this great man, who's almost like the father I saw tragically lost, eaten away on the insides by swarms of insects. Insects, I might sadly add, that our mammy says will one day hollow ourselves out too. May Dagda have mercy on us. Yes, wasn't I explaining to the great Fionn Micheál, whom I may say it is a most amazing honour to have among us, telling him now a little bit about how we have set about collecting some things for the Fianna. Callig's moustache started quivering. Micheál put a hand on the middling Bonham's shoulder and said, You'd better be quiet now. I myself have great patience for noise coming out of a man's mouth, but this man Callig, I am told, does not have a patient ear for nonsense and raw mash, other than when he is talking it himself. A little Bonniff butted in. You see, we are a noble family, an offshoot of the Inale of Ulster, actually, and it is in our blood to do good work and to collect alms for the benefit of the kings. And as he was talking, he was groping behind a flat stone ledge, but of course the jar his fingers were searching for had already been safely removed. Matha could not believe that the Bonhams were unable to take the fair warning that Micheál had given them. Finally, Callig snapped. Shut your slippery gobs, you flowery little men, he yelled. He was not much bigger than the smallest of them himself. That was the end of the talk. The blackthorn sprang back into life. Callig was now following the stick into all kinds of moves that a man of his age should not have been able to make. After a few minutes of flailing, Micheál started to feel pity for the Bonniffs. He could see they had no ounce of defence in them. Even though they had caused much grief, they were very lacking in intentional wickedness. He lifted Callig out, as it was the only way he could get his stick to stop hammering the runners. Word was sent that anyone who had lost things could come to the cave and then to Tobin's house to see if they could find their possessions. Before anyone could lay claim to anything, Matha was given the chance to go look for the bowl. He didn't know what it looked like, so he asked for Shay Senior, the woodcutter, to be brought. Shay was the happiest man in the country, as every one of his family things were still there, all stashed together in an inner cavern. He pulled out a very roughly made little yellow-brown bowl, one any good potter would have thrown aside for shame. I hope you will be able to manage this bold little object, says Shay. Matha thanked him. Shay then reached into a sack of halters and rooted around for a while. Eventually he said, here it is. He pulled out a round bronze breastplate. He asked Matha to run his fingers over it. It was the most beautiful object Matha had ever seen. It had a fine relief of a great stallion rearing up in front of giant trees surrounded by finely engraved twirling designs. This is the old Shea emblem, always worn by our best horse over 20 generations, said Shea. Only the most mighty steed capable of pulling 2 tree trunks was honoured with it. You take it, and when your little black pony is better, put it on her. Micheál said a strange thing to the runners as they stood outside the cave waiting to hear their fate. He said, "You think your big mistake was using that powder and taking too much gold. But you're wrong. Your big mistake was taking one ordinary little bowl." He glanced at Matha with a smile in his eyes and added, "You should have known that a quiet little thing like that, stored safely away where no one could touch it, had a particular kind of rightful owner, one who would not let go, one who would follow you quietly to the ends of time till he got his possession back. It was when you tried to separate that bowl from its destiny that you finally ran out of luck." The Bonner boys looked at Matha, and he was sure that he saw fear in their eyes. He looked away from them. The Bonner boys were brought to a gathering of the flaes and chief of the area, who, after consulting their brehons, decreed that the runner Bonhams must work for 5 years without the right to own anything, one of them in each of the finne where they had done most robbing. During that time they would not be allowed to attend any festivals, nor to present themselves anywhere as respectable people. On the suggestion of Conan, as well as doing general work, they were each to plough, till, seed, weed and weed again, 2 rows of turnips every year, and a bag of turnips grown by each of them was to be sent to King Cormac. After the 5 years, it was hoped that they would have learned the satisfaction of work, and they could work for themselves and their mother, if the dear lady had not had her insides eaten out by insects by then. If they ever robbed again, they'd be deported to separate, uninhabited islands in Loch Derg without their mother. The Bonhams dreaded this, as they were fond of talking, so they vowed, without much as they hated work, not to steal again. Tobin had a very quiet time from then on. Most other bandits avoided him, fearing betrayal. But at least he was thankful to have been left in the company of frogs rather than his wife's people. The happy ash disappeared completely. Micheál and Conan always denied any knowledge of its whereabouts. With the little bowl safely in his possession, Matha was sure that his life was about to return to what it ought to have been. He would right what was wrong. He would call the horse's life back to it. He and his mother could live again in peace and comfort. He would not bother to tell his neighbours about meeting the 2 great warriors, as they wouldn't believe him. Matha had no way of knowing that his quest wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun.